How do you explain that term to a 10-year-old boy who one day hears it mentioned by some relatives? And even if you do manage to make him understand what it actually does mean, do you also tell him that because he is a German Jew, perhaps someday he might be included in it? Or should he just not be told so that he remains calm and doesn't lose sleep over it? But what is sleep in front of death? Perhaps death is greater. Perhaps the two are the same. We do not know yet, but will know by the end of the day. The chambers are yet some hours away. To die, to sleep perchance to dream. How did Shakespeare realize that? Did he know some Jew who was persecuted too? Perhaps he was wrong. Maybe he was right. Anyway, I suspect we'll find out by tonight. That is a poem called Holocaust by Sudeep Pajdar, a woman who knew a great deal about the Holocaust. The Devil's Arithmetic stars a young girl named Hannah who, learning about her Jewish ancestry, comes to discover just how important this event in her history was and its greater deal to the world. The Devil's Arithmetic is a historical fiction novel written by American author Jane Yelin and published in 1988. The novel stars a young girl named Hannah Stern, a Jewish American girl who lives in New Rochelle, New York. The novel is a great read for young readers due to its many themes. Not only does it impart a great deal of knowledge about the Holocaust and World War II, specifically from the eyes of a young adult, but it also includes such themes as time travel, with the young girl going back in time to 1942 Poland to experience Auschwitz firsthand. Auschwitz is, of course, one of the many concentration camps used by Nazi soldiers during the Holocaust. The Holocaust is also known as the Shoah in Hebrew, which means the catastrophe. The Holocaust was a genocide in which approximately 6 million Jewish men and women and children were killed by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Historians use a definition of the Holocaust that includes the additional 5 million non-Jewish victims of Nazi mass murders, which brings our total to approximately 11 million deaths during this time. Throughout Nazi Germany and German-occupied territories from 1941 to 1945, Jewish people were methodically murdered in a genocide, one of the largest in history, and part of a broader set of acts of oppression and killings of various ethnic and political groups in Europe by the Nazi regime. Every arm of Germany's political system was involved in the genocide, turning their Third Reich into a genocidal state. Of the 9 million Jewish people who resided in Europe before the Holocaust, approximately 2/3 were killed by the Nazis. The persecution that began the Holocaust was carried out in stages. Initially, the German government passed a set of laws to exclude Jewish people from civil society. Most prominent of these was the Nuremberg Laws of 1935. A network of concentration camps then followed, and after the outbreak of World War II in 1939, ghettos were established by Nazi Germany to ward off Jewish members of society into dilapidated, poorer parts of their cities and towns. In 1941, Germany began to take new actions. Around 2 million Jewish men and women were killed by specialized military groups, often by mass shootings. More and more death occurred as Germany began to conquer new territory across Eastern Europe, spreading their presence. By the end of 1942, Jewish victims were being regularly transported by freight train to specifically built extermination camps, such as Auschwitz. If these people survived the harsh journey, most were systematically killed in inhumane ways, such as by gas chamber. This awful campaign of murder continued until the end of World War II in Europe in 1945. This information returns us back to Hannah Stern, the young protagonist of The Devil's Arithmetic. At the beginning of the novel, she and her family, including her parents and younger brother Aaron, are going to attend a Passover Seder at her grandparents' home. Hannah has never had any interest in attending nor hearing about the stories of her grandparents' past. For too long, she has felt uncomfortable listening to her grandpa Will rant about his experiences in the concentration camps during the Holocaust. But all of that changes when Hannah rises from the table to open the door for the prophet Elijah during the Passover Seder. Once the door is opened, she is transported to Poland in 1942, where she inhabits the body of Shia Abramowitz. Now stuck in this new life, Hannah will face many ordeals. Of these, on her way to a neighboring village, her and her new friends are stopped by Nazi soldiers who insist that they must be relocated. Hannah is the only one who knows what is actually about to happen to these people. She tries to explain why they must not go with the soldiers, but everyone around her explains that they have no choice. Her and her friends are loaded onto trucks and driven off to a train station, where they are herded like cattle into cars with barely any room to breathe or move. The ride on the train lasts for days and days, and several children and infants do not survive the harsh conditions. Hannah and the others finally arrive at the concentration camp Auschwitz, where they are quickly divided by gender and by age. The women and children remain together while the men live in separate rooms. The prisoners are showered and their hair is cut very short. They are marked with prisoner numbers. They are not fed for days, and they only receive a watery potato soup and bread as nourishment. While prisoner at the concentration camp, Hannah befriends a young girl named Rivka, and together they try their best to survive and remain unchosen for extermination. Hannah must overcome many challenges while being held prisoner in the concentration camp. During this time, she begins to have a better appreciation for her family and the stories that they would tell, for she knows that without them, her chance of survival would be minimal. But what will happen to Hannah? Will she make it out of the concentration camp alive? Will her friends survive the horrible atrocities of Auschwitz? Will American soldiers come to their rescue? Will she be able to make it back to her own time, to her own family in New York? Or will she be stuck in the past forever? To learn more, I guess you'll have to find out by reading. So check up on The Devil's Arithmetic by Jane Yolen in your local library today.